What's up? Welcome to part 23 of Project 2025, read by Douglas Wayne Ricketts. Mandate for Leadership. The Conservative Promise. We're up to page 285 of this 920-page PDF. This section is titled Agency for International Development by Max Primorak. I think I might have said his name as Primorak at the end of the last episode. But I've heard other people say it as Primorak since then. Mission. The U.S. Agency for International Development leads the U.S. government's international development and disaster assistance programs. USAID helps communities to lead their own development journeys by reducing the impact of conflict, preventing hunger and the spread of pandemic disease, and counteracting the drivers of violence, instability, transnational crime, and other threats. No wonder Trump wanted to get rid of USAID. In alignment with U.S. national security interests, the agency promotes American prosperity through initiatives that expand markets for U.S. exports, encourage innovation, create a level playing field for U.S. businesses, and support more stable, resilient, and democratic societies that are less likely to act against American interests and more likely to respect family, life, and religious liberty. Overview. USAID was established during the presidency of John F. Kennedy pursuant to the Foreign Assistance Act of 1961 to promote the foreign policy, security, and national interest of the United States. At the height of the Cold War with the Soviet Union, it sought to halt the spread of communism by assisting peoples in the developing world in their efforts to advance economically, socially, and politically. The agency helped to transition Central and Eastern Europe from socialism to free market-based democracies. Today, USAID leads the U.S. government's global development and humanitarian disaster assistance responses. Over the years, USAID expanded the number of countries assisted, the scope and size of its activities, and especially its budget. The Trump administration faced an institution marred by bureaucratic inertia, programmatic incoherence, wasteful spending, and dependence on huge awards to a self-serving and politicized aid industrial complex of United Nations agencies, international non-governmental organizations, NGOs, and for-profit contractors. Once started, programs continue almost indefinitely, in many countries for decades. USAID's multi-billion-dollar humanitarian programs that were once 80% in response to natural disasters are now 80% in response to violent, man-made crises and have become a permanent and immiserating feature of the global landscape. I've got to look up the word immiserating. I've never seen that word before. To cause to become poor or impoverished. Under the Trump administration, USAID focused on ending the need for foreign aid by placing countries onto a journey to self-reliance. The administration restructured the agency to reflect this strategic approach to development, streamlined procurement procedures to diversify its partner base, increased awards to cost-effective local, including faith-based organizations, and improved internal governance. It instituted pro-life and family-friendly policies. It promoted international religious freedom as a pillar of the agency's work, and built up an unprecedented genocide response infrastructure. The Biden administration has deformed the agency by treating it as a global platform to pursue overseas a divisive political and cultural agenda that promotes abortion, climate extremism, gender radicalism, and interventions against perceived systemic racism. It has dispensed with decades of bipartisan consensus on foreign aid and pursued policies that contravene basic American values and have antagonized our partners in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. It has decoupled U.S. assistance from free market reforms that are the keystone of economic and political stability, and has teamed with global institutions to impose central planning diktats on an unprecedented scale. Wasteful budget increases requested by the administration and appropriated by Congress have outstripped U.S. aid's capacity to spend funds responsibly, and U.S. foreign aid has been transformed into a massive and open-ended global entitlement program captured by and enriching the progressive left, left is capitalized for some reason. The next conservative administration should scale back U.S. aid's global footprint by, at a minimum, returning to the agency's 2019 pre-COVID-19 pandemic budget level. It should de-radicalize U.S. aid's programs and structures and build on the conservative reforms instituted by the Trump administration. This will require working closely with the U.S. Congress to make deep cuts in the International Affairs 150 account, while granting U.S. aid greater flexibility in spending its appropriated funds to achieve better developmental outcomes. Key issues: aligning U.S. foreign aid to U.S. foreign policy. U.S. foreign aid is too often disconnected from the strategy and practice of U.S. foreign policy. Its coordination is made difficult as the aid budget is divided among approximately 20 offices, agencies, and departments that provide some form of foreign assistance. The U.S. aid administrator should be authorized to take on the additional role of Director of Foreign Assistance, DFA, with the rank of Deputy Secretary at the Department of State in charge of all U.S. foreign assistance. The DFA role would empower this person to align and coordinate the countless foreign assistance programs across the U.S. government and carry out the agenda of the next conservative president more effectively. A version of this role existed during the last 2 years of the George W. Bush administration, but the Obama administration eliminated it in 2009. Countering China's development challenge. Through its $1 trillion Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, the People's Republic of China, PRC, has directed billions of dollars in loans and investments to advance its geostrategic objective of displacing the United States as the premier global power. The PRC leverages its transactions, termed debt traps by many critics, to strengthen its global influence, extract natural resources, isolate Taiwan, win political support at international fora, and access ports and bases for its military. In Latin America, 25 of 29 countries participate in the BRI, and the PRC ranks as the region's largest trading partner. Since 2005, Chinese state-owned banks have issued $138 billion in loans to Latin American countries, and other Chinese entities have invested an additional $140 billion. In Africa, China has issued $160 billion in loans and dominates the continent's rare earth mining sector, which is critical to global energy development. The World Bank estimates that 60% of all BRI loans are in financial distress, leading many countries to seek emergency financial help from Western donors. Chinese-funded projects are known for employing substandard labor and environmental practices, fueling corruption, promoting wasteful financial decisions by governments, advancing China's geostrategic interests, and creating an unequal trade relationship in which China secures raw materials from developing countries and sells those countries' manufacturing products. For example, Brazil, a world leader in shoe production, saw its industry collapse under a flood of cheap Chinese imports. Chinese mercantilist penetration of the developing world and the negative consequences for developing countries' healthy economic growth have undercut U.S. strategic relationships in those countries and wasted billions in U.S. foreign aid. During the Trump administration, U.S. aid inaugurated a robust counter-China response called Clear Choice that contrasted America's development approach based on liberty, sovereignty, and free markets with China's mercantilist authoritarianism that pursued predatory financing schemes and economic and political subordination to Beijing. Launched its first digital strategy to promote safe 5G access in emerging markets and combat Beijing's efforts to equip regimes with tools to stifle democracy. Struck bilateral development relationships with Japan, Israel, Kuwait, Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, and Taiwan to support projects in sub-Saharan Africa, Asia, Latin America, and the Middle East. Established an office in Greenland to help counter China's claims of being a near-Arctic state, and reoriented its programming across Asia, including establishing a U.S. aid mission to Central Asia, in line with America's Indo-Pacific strategy. Joined with the U.S. Department of Homeland Security and National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration to help coastal countries detect and halt illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing and confront criminal activities practiced by state-run Chinese fishing fleets that violate international norms, ravage fishing industries in developing countries, worsen food insecurity, rob vulnerable communities of their livelihoods, and deplete maritime resources. U.S. aid built an organizational infrastructure to carry out its multiple lines of counter-China operatives. An agency-wide Clear Choice Executive Council and USAID-US International Development Finance Corporation Working Group reviewed all proposed assistance programs and proposals through a counter-China lens. A senior executive-level Clear Choice coordinator, reporting to the administrator, advised the agency's leadership on initiatives to counter China, supported by a fully dedicated 6-person secretariat. The Biden administration discontinued these programs and allowed USAID's counter-China architecture to waste away, subordinating our national security interests to progressive climate politics in which communist China is viewed as a global partner. The next conservative administration should restore and build on the Trump administration's counter-China infrastructure at USAID, end the climate policy fanaticism that advantages Beijing, and assess bilateral aid through the lens of U.S. national security interests, rewarding those countries that resist China's debt diplomacy. It should finance programs designed to counter specific Chinese efforts in strategically important countries and eliminate funding to any partner that engages with Chinese entities directly or indirectly. USAID's Bangkok-based Regional Development Mission for Asia should focus its strategic attention on supporting cross-border initiatives designed to counter Chinese influence. Climate change. Upon taking office, President Biden issued executive orders to put the climate crisis at the center of U.S. foreign policy and national security, and mitigate the devastating inequalities that intersect with gender, race, ethnicity, and economic security. USAID subsequently declared itself a climate agency and redirected its private sector engagement strategy, teaming with America's corporate sector to wean countries off foreign aid through private investment and trade, to support the administration's global policy to transition from fossil fuels to renewable energy. The administration has incorporated its radical climate policy into every U.S. aid initiative. It has joined or funded international partnerships dedicated to advancing the aims of the Paris Climate Agreement, and has supported the idea of giving trillions of dollars more in aid transfers for climate reparations. The Biden administration's extreme climate policies have worsened global food insecurity and hunger. Its anti-fossil fuel agenda has led to a sharp spike in global energy prices. Inflation has hit the poor the hardest as they expend a higher proportion of income on food purchases. Farmers in poor countries can no longer afford to buy expensive natural gas-based fertilizers that are key to achieving high yields of food production. Under advice from climate radicals, the government of Sri Lanka even banned chemical fertilizers entirely without having any replacements in place. The result has been hunger and violent political instability. The aid industry claims that climate change causes poverty, which is false. That's patently untrue. And of course, they don't have a citation, they're just making that claim. Enduring conflict, government corruption, and bad economic policies are the main drivers of global poverty. U.S. aid's response to man-made food insecurity is to provide more billions of dollars in aid, a recipe that will keep scores of poor countries underdeveloped and dependent on foreign aid for years to come. The impact on Africa is especially acute. South Africa, for example, relies on coal-powered plants to generate 80% of its power needs. It would need $26 billion in foreign aid to make the full transition away from coal. Multiplying this amount by dozens of other countries on the continent, the financial resources needed to transition away from fossil fuels are unachievable. In Latin America, countries that are global leaders in oil and gas production have sharply curtailed their energy production in line with climate activists, upending the hemisphere's major source of export revenues and condemning it to years of economic and political instability. U.S. aid should cease its war on fossil fuels in the developing world and support the responsible management of oil and gas reserves as the quickest way to end wrenching poverty and the need for open-ended foreign aid. The next conservative administration should rescind all climate policies from its foreign aid programs, specifically USAID's Climate Strategy 2022 to 2030, shut down the agency's offices, programs, and directives designed to advance the Paris Climate Agreement, and narrowly limit funding to traditional climate mitigation efforts. USAID resources are best deployed to strengthen the resilience of countries that are most vulnerable to climatic shifts. The agency should cease collaborating with and funding progressive foundations, corporations, international institutions, and NGOs that advocate on behalf of climate fanaticism. They keep calling any reference to supporting making the climate better fanaticism. Is it fanatical to want everyone to have clean air and water? Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Agenda. USAID installed advisors on diversity, equity, and inclusion (DEI) committees in all its bureaus, offices, and overseas missions, and created an agency-wide dashboard and DEI scorecard for all bureaus, offices, and missions to track staff compliance with the administration's DEI directives. A chief DEI officer oversees this DEI infrastructure and sits in the administrator's office. DEI directives are now part of all agency policies and are incorporated as standard clauses in all contract and grant awards. Those seeking to do business with the agency must describe the approaches they will use to diversify their partner base. USAID often ties DEI to gender and climate equity, corrupting every aspect of the agency's overseas work. The upshot has been to racialize the agency and create a hostile work environment for anyone who disagrees with the Biden administration's identity politics. This pursuit of ideological purity threatens merit-based professional advancement for staff who do not overtly conform, hyper-politicizes what should be a nonpartisan federal workplace environment, creates an institutionalized cadre of progressive political commissars, corrupts the award process, and discourages potential contractors and grantees that disagree with this radical agenda from applying for USAID funding. The next conservative administration should dismantle USAID's DEI apparatus by eliminating the Chief Diversity Officer position, along with the DEI advisors and committees. Cancel the DEI scorecard and dashboard. Remove DEI requirements from contract and grant tenders and awards. Issue a directive to cease promotion of the DEI agenda, including the bullying LGBTQ+ agenda, and provide staff a confidential medium through which to adjudicate cases of political retaliation that agency or implementing staff suffered during the Biden administration. It should eliminate funding for partners that promote discriminatory DEI practices and consider debarment in egregious cases. As federal departments and agencies cannot play partisan politics, staff, irrespective of hiring mechanism, as well as implementers and grantees that engage in ideological agitation on behalf of the DEI agenda, should be dismissed, and entities should be debarred. The next conservative administration should return the authority over all civil rights issues at USAID to the agency's Office of Civil Rights, which is the appropriate locus for ensuring that all Americans have guaranteed equality of career opportunity at USAID, refocusing gender equality on women, children, and families. Instead of protecting women's and children's unalienable human rights and propelling their ability to thrive in society, past Democrat administrations have nearly erased what females are and what femininity is through gender policies and practices. Really? Bet if I got a room full of 10 women, I could ask them all, has your ability to be female been erased? And they would all say, no. I get it. I know what's happening here. They don't like that women are being encouraged to be equal and they don't need to stick with traditional gender roles put forth by these backward-minded knuckleheads who want to bring us back to the 1950s or earlier. For instance, these administrations have diluted USAID's focus on assisting vulnerable women, children, and families around the globe by adding protections for and ideological advocacy on behalf of progressive, special interest groups. USAID now aggressively promotes abortion on demand under the guise of sexual and reproductive health and reproductive rights, gender equality, and women's empowerment, and advocates for those who claim minority status or vulnerability. I want to make something very crystal clear right here. most people who are against abortion rights think they're Christian. This is in spite of the fact that the Bible they pretend to believe in not only states multiple times that life begins at first breath. There's a specific passage called Numbers 5, which, honest to goodness, describes how to induce a magical abortion in order to determine if a wife cheated. I didn't make any of that up. It's all in there. Freaking hypocrites. Families are the basic unit of and foundation for a thriving society. Without women, there are no children, and society cannot continue. As evidenced by the confirmation testimony of now Associate Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, the progressive left has so misused and altered the definition of what a woman is that one of our U.S. Supreme Court justices was unable to delineate clearly the fundamental biological and sexual traits that define the group of which she is a part. U.S. aid cannot advocate for and protect women when they have been erased globally, along with the values and traditional structures that have supported them. That's a fun phrase MAGA likes to use on debate forums. You don't know what a woman is! Yes I do, sir. A woman is a person who covers her drink instinctively when you slither into the bar she's at. The next conservative administration should rename the USAID Office of Gender Equality and Women's Empowerment, the GEWE, as the USAID Office of Women, Children, and Families. Refocus and realign resources that currently support programs in GEWE to the Office of Women, Children, and Families. Redesignate the Senior Gender Coordinator as an unapologetically pro-life, politically appointed Senior Coordinator of the Office of Women, Children, and Families. And eliminate the more than 180 gender advisors and points of contact embedded in missions and operating units throughout the agency. In addition, the next conservative administration should rescind President Biden's 2022 gender policy and refocus it on women, children, and families, and revise the agency's regulation on integrating gender equality and female empowerment in USAID's program cycle. It should remove all references, examples, definitions, photos, and language on USAID websites, in agency publications and policies, and in all agency contracts and grants that include the following terms: gender, gender equality, gender equity, gender diverse individuals, gender aware, gender sensitive, etc. It should also remove references to abortion, reproductive health, and sexual and reproductive rights, and controversial sexual education materials. In the past, the word gender was a polite alternative to the word sex, or term biological sex. The left has commandeered the term gender, which used to mean either male or female, to include a spectrum of others who are seeking to alter biological and societal sexual norms. It's a strange use of the word sexual there, because you're the one using a word incorrectly by using sexual, sir. The promotion of gender radicalism is anathema to the traditional norms of many societies where USAID works, causes resentment by tying life-saving assistance to rejecting the aid recipient's own firmly held fundamental values regarding sexuality, and produces unnecessary consternation and confusion among and even outright bias against men. The next administration should ensure that USAID's goal in service of its mission is to help protect and propel all members of society, women, children, and men, from conception to natural death. To do so, USAID's Office of Women, Children, and Families should strive to ensure that communities have their basic human needs, without which they will be unable to thrive, met first and foremost. Basic human needs include equal and safe access to potable water, sanitation, food, education, healthcare, houses of worship, justice, pregnancy and family resource centers, working capital, electricity, technology, and business opportunities. The Office of Women, Children, and Families should implement the Geneva Consensus Declaration on Women's Health and Protection of the Family and prioritize partnerships with local organizations, including faith-based organizations, FBOs. All right, I'm going to stop there for today. The next section looks to drive me nuts. It's called Protecting Life in Foreign Assistance. I'm sure it's going to be filled with a ton of hypocrisy. This recording and all other recordings related to this Project 2025 reading are copyrighted by Douglas Wayne Ricketts. All rights reserved. Unless you agree with me that Project 2025 sucks, then please feel free to use as much of this reading as you want. Thanks for listening.